Hey, it's Jeff. Welcome back to another video. This is kind of my crazy out of control Philodendron Brasil. Today I simply wanted to make a care and propagation video just to show you how I get it to grow this large. But last night I took it down to give it some water and I realized there's a few other issues kind of ongoing with this plant. Not only is it getting super long, I want to prune it a little bit here, so I'll show you guys that, but it's also thinning out on top a little bit. So I'm going to talk about how to get a thinning out plant a little bit more bushier again. And then I also looked at the bottom of the pot and there's some roots poking through the drain hole there. So I'm going to take it out of the pot just to make sure it's not root bound, as I want this to continue to grow and thrive on my plant shelf here. So let's get into it. Before I tear into this plant, I want to quickly talk about the basic care for these plants. This one is actually propagated cuttings from the mother plant, probably about like 6 months ago. There's actually two different types of plants in this pot. This is the neon pothos and then the Philodendron Brasil. I propagated them in water and potted them in some soil, and they're doing fantastic. These plants are grown in completely different locations. Obviously this one behind me is downstairs here. It's 100% grow lights. It receives probably around that like low to medium light. I like to use a light meter to help me determine what type of light my plant is getting. They can tolerate low, medium, and even a little bit of that higher light. If you put it in higher light, obviously you're going to get more of the light green or lime green variegation. This one is on my plant shelf. It's on a west wall. It's near a south-facing window, so it's getting probably that medium light location right now. It's September and the sun is lower in the sky, so it's actually getting a little bit of direct sunlight throughout the morning, and it's kind of in that medium foot candle light range, which is about 250 foot candles to 500 foot candles. That's kind of the range for medium light. Now for low light plants like this one down here, low light is kind of categorized between like 50 foot candles up to 250. So this is just on the verge of kind of that low to medium light location, and they do really well. This one just grows extremely fast. It's got a little bit more of the darker green leaf with the lime green variegation down the middle of the plant, whereas this one receiving more light, it's got some like lighter variegations. Now for watering, I will let the soil completely dry out and then I'll give it a good soaking until it comes out the bottom of the drain hole. This one I actually bottom water quite often just because it's on my plant shelf. It's kind of difficult to remove a few plants that are in front of it, so I like to just fill up the saucer and bottom water. Bottom watering, if you are unfamiliar, it actually trains the roots to search out or down into the soil, lower in the pot so that it can obtain that moisture. Yeah, bottom watering is really beneficial for a number of reasons, but you have to be careful because it can build up a little bit of that salt content depending on the type of water that you're using. So occasionally you may have to top water and then just completely flush out the soil, and it will flush out all those kind of mineral buildup. For soil, I like to use a nice chunky mixture, something that is really well draining. I always use Pro Mix's Tropical Plant Mix, and then I'll add in some perlite. It's just a nice, consistent, well draining soil. And occasionally I'll put some orchid bark in there as well. It's kind of like an aeroid mix. It's just a very fast draining soil. Just like pothos plants, they don't like to sit in soggy soil for very long, but they do appreciate a good thorough watering. So it's just enough to hold on to some moisture so that those roots can kind of utilize that water in the soil. Now for pots, it really doesn't matter as long as there are drain holes in the bottom. It doesn't really matter if it's a plastic nursery pot or a terracotta pot. I like to use terracotta for most of my house plants. It's just very porous. It basically evaporates the soil moisture if it just stays a little bit too wet. But if you use terracotta, you might have to water a little bit more frequently than you would if it was in like a plastic nursery pot. For fertilizer, I just use Dynagrow's Foliage Pro. It's just a liquid fertilizer. I follow the instructions on the back, just mix it up in some water, and then when this plant needs to be watered, then I'll use the water and fertilizer mixture. Otherwise, if you water it and then like a couple days later you add fertilizer and water, you're probably just going to overwater the plant and it'll probably die back, and yeah, it won't look good. So I only give fertilizer when the plant needs water. For humidity, right now downstairs it's about 53%, so kind of that regular house humidity is fine for these plants. You don't get any like crispy leaves or anything like that if they are in regular house humidity. So that's pretty much it for care. Now for pests, I have had thrips on these plants actually a few times. I did have thrips last year on this larger one. I treated it with a couple different products. This is Safer's End All. It is an insecticide. Basically, you spray the plant down. It is an insecticide, so it does have to come in contact with the bug. Sometimes it's a little more difficult just because you have to obviously contact, or this product has to be in contact with the bug. So if they're underneath the leaves, sometimes it can be a little bit tricky to completely treat the plant, especially if it's a larger plant. So for that reason, I like to use, this is systemic granules. Basically what you do with this product is you put a couple scoops in the soil, mix it in, and then when your plant needs water, you water it. The insecticide, or the ingredients of the insecticide, kind of leach down into the soil. The roots take it up, and any sap-sucking bugs that bite into the leaves will ingest this product, and eventually they will die. So this is kind of the hit 'em hard type product for like a really bad thrips infestation. I think you can also get spider mites, but otherwise just kind of general preventative maintenance. Like if you spray down your houseplants, I'll sometimes take it outside and spray it off. That might blast off any bugs that are on there. But before I even take it off the shelf, I'm just gonna cut this longer, or these longer stems, just like that, so it's a little bit more manageable. I just want to show this quickly here as well. This is where I've previously made a prune. You can see there's a new little growth point coming out from the closest node, and sometimes it'll actually start to branch further up the stem or the vine just from pruning it. So you will not kill your plant. It will start to regrow from that node, and it may actually branch out further along. So you're not going to harm your plant. You're actually kind of rejuvenating it in a sense. So yeah, I'm going to take it down. This one, I'm going to cut back a little bit closer to the node because you don't need that long internode. And then of course you can take these cuttings, chop them up, and you can propagate them in water or even like a perlite prop box, and you can start an entirely new plant. But what I'm going to do with these cuttings is I'm actually going to be, putting them back in the pot up here at some point, just to fill out the top portion. So that's how you get either an entirely new pot of Philodendron Brasil, or you can fill in areas where it's quite bare with existing plants. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. But what you want to do is you want to cut in between two nodes. So this in between two nodes, here's a node and here's a node. So you cut in between so that you have a single leaf cutting. So here's a leaf, here's the petiole, and then here's the stem with the node, and it's got some aerial roots on there. These are where the roots are going to grow from, and I'll show you an example in my container here in a second, but I'm just going to chop these up, and you just go down the stem, just chopping them up into individual leaves. So these will produce their own individual new stem, and when you kind of clump them together, then you can start an entirely new pot. So I'm going to take these guys out, and I'll show you quickly some examples of where they root. So here's a leaf, the petiole, and here is the stem, and it's got some nice water roots on there. You can see these are definitely ready to be potted up in some soil. I put a few Scindapsus cuttings in the water a few days ago after my epic fail with my jade satin. If you haven't seen that video, you can go check it out. I'll leave it up in the top corner. Yeah. Here is another cutting. It's got a small little growth point right there. So that's the new stem kind of poking through. And then here's the longer water roots. So yeah, they're all doing really good. Here's another example of a growth point. So I might actually trim this up a little bit more. And you can see it is actually quite bare on top. So I want to just kind of fix that. So where's my knife? I might cut it back a little bit more, but I'm just going to take this out of the pot. It hasn't been repotted for a while. I'm hoping this doesn't completely fall apart. It's probably going to, just like my jade satin did. What a disaster that was. So hopefully this isn't a repeat of that. Again, it's really hard to repot larger plants. Okay, I'm just poking the bottom of the drain hole here. Actually, it's not bad at all. I'm just going to set this down for a second. Definitely lots of roots. If you can see it or not. Lots of roots in the pot here, but it's not terrible. It's not like a complete solid root ball. It's not encircling yet. But what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my utility knife and I'm just going to slice off a bottom portion of the roots just so that it can rejuvenate those roots to search down into the pot. It's close to being root bound, so I don't want to leave it like this and let it get root bound, say like in a month or two, and then have to pull it out of the pot again. So I'm gonna slice the roots right now, put it in some fresh soil so those roots can rejuvenate and kind of grow down into soil again. You may want to consider root pruning a plant if you want it to remain in the same size pot, and that's the exact reason why I'm doing it today. I don't have an area where I can just keep upsizing a pot for the plant, so I'm going to cut off a third of the root system. I'm going to do a little bit more of a prune here as well, just so it doesn't shock the plant, and I simply just cut the roots like it's a piece of cake. Just slice it off like that, just a nice clean cut, and those roots will regrow. So it's actually pretty solid. It's a pretty solid root ball. So now I'm just going to take the same pot that I had it in with the saucer, and I'm going to grab my soil. It's just down here on a little shelf, and I'm just going to add all this soil into the bottom of the pot, roughly the same depth as what I took off of the roots, and I'm just going to stick it back in the pot and let it kind of recover. Okay, so I'll just take it back, stick it in the pot, and I'm going to add a little bit of soil just on top. So this went way smoother than my Scindapsus repotting. That one was a nightmare. I did have to take those cuttings out of the pot. They were starting to get pretty curled, so I put them in my prop box. So hopefully I can save them. Just adding a little bit more soil just around the sides of the pot, spilling soil everywhere, making a huge mess. Okay, so it's repotted. That was just a quick and easy root prune. I'm actually going to take a little bit more off of these stems here. There was a few stems that were actually tucked back up in the pot, so I'm just going to cut those off as well, just kind of shortening it up a little bit. I'm going to cut it right back to there. It's just like giving it a haircut. Looks like I've pruned in a lot of these spots before, so just cutting them back. It will regrow. I'm not scared about harming the plant or anything like that, or something like that. The reason why I'm cutting it back is I don't want like all these leaves obstructing the light that my plants on the floor are getting. So I want to show this right here. I previously made a prune right there, and then right here it's branching from the node further down. I don't see any other branches, but that's just one example of how when you make one prune, it's starting to branch out there, and it branched out right here. So now in regards to getting a plant to look bushier, there's a couple different ways. The first one I'm going to talk about is just taking like an existing vine and placing it back in the pot. You want these nodes and these aerial roots to come in contact with the soil, so you can bury it in the soil like that. I might have to put it down a little bit further. And the concept is that it will root itself in the soil, and eventually it should push out an entirely new vine. You can chop it up afterwards if you like. I've never had any success with any of my plants that I've previously tried this with. So you can see I just buried the vine just slightly underneath the soil, and then it comes out over here. I'm gonna see if that works again. Another method is to take all these propagated cuttings and stick them back in soil. Sometimes the success rate for this isn't the greatest, just because the water roots might have a little bit of a tough transition just going directly into soil. So if you want to do it the proper way, what I would do is take all these cuttings, pot them in their own individual pot of soil. That way they can transition from water to soil. And basically you want to keep the soil wet for about maybe the first week or two, and then cut back the watering so that it's a regular watering for this specific plant. But I'm not going to do that because I don't want to wait. So I'm just using my little pencil, just making a hole just directly in the soil, and then I'm just pushing them down. Just making sure those roots are covered. And I'm just going to go around. It's actually just easier just to do it with your finger. Just make a hole and place them in. That's the difficult thing about these vining plants is once they get large, it's really difficult to like take them out of the pots and do like a repotting, and it's just not the easiest. And now I'm just gonna add a little bit more soil just on top, just so that all these cuttings are covered. Same with the stem here as well. Make sure everything's settled. Oh, there's a couple cuttings right here that need to get tucked in a little bit. So just so you can see, it does look a little bit fuller on top with those new leaf cuttings in there. So obviously you're gonna have to give it some time for those individual leaf nodes to push out their own new vine. You can drape that over the top as well, just to give it kind of that more bushier look. I'm gonna clean up here quick and then I'll show you the final product once it's put back up on the shelf there. But otherwise, I think that's gonna be pretty much it for this video. If you have any comments or questions, please leave it down below. Check out some of my other videos on my channel. You can click this video right here. But otherwise, thanks again for watching. Take care, everyone. Bye.